Hello, welcome to from Caracas. In this special opportunity, we are once again from the Forum of Sao Paulo here, being held here in Caracas in Venezuela from this 25th to the 28th of July. And in this special occasion for this event, we have different guests who will share with us their expectations, their thoughts, why solidarity is so important today, why having these kind of meetings to unite the left in the world, and why progressive movements are necessary. And today we start talking with Gloria de la Riva. Welcome. She is a leader of Socialism and Liberation Movement, and she will share with us some ideas. Gloria, welcome to From Caracas. Please, what are your expectations? What do you bring to this Sao Paulo Forum here in Caracas?
I think the Forum Sao Paulo comes at an extremely important moment where it is evident that the Guaido project of the United States in trying to overthrow the legitimate government of President Maduro has absolutely failed. It already failed a long time ago, but after 6 months, even the right-wing opposition is fracturing greatly. And yet the U.S. is cooking up other plans because their intent is to try to overthrow the government and the revolution. And so with the non-aligned movement that came, more than 120 countries, to express the legitimacy of Maduro's government, and now with the Foro Sao Paulo in Caracas, these are double blows to the U.S. isolation plans. Because it's the U.S. trying to isolate Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua on its march against any country that's independent.
Of course, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba are called the axis of evil by United States. Why are those three countries considered like that? What's wrong with them? Is there something wrong with them?
Well, there may be even other countries that the U.S. wants to attack, like Bolivia, for example. But if we look, we have to look back at 2009. With the overthrow of Zelaya, the president of Honduras, which really set forth a whole chain of reactionary moves by the U.S., the parliamentary coups, the use of law falsely to overthrow governments, and to try to turn back the whole progressive movement that was taking place with the development of ALBA, the CELAC organization. The U.S. had already made clear in 2008 and 2009 that they were not going to tolerate the leftward movement. The alliance of the progressive governments of Latin America and the Caribbean, saying we should share our resources, our human capital, our solidarity for true development. It was an unprecedented development in Latin America, and some of that's been greatly damaged. The fascist president of Brazil, the attack in Argentina, and now we see Macri and that whole gang of right-wingers. And this is a threat to Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. Why? Well, because Cuba has stayed so strong. It's truly a model of what socialism means, despite 60 years of blockade. I mean, you really have to regard with great admiration what the Cuban people have done, but what socialism can provide in organization, central planning, peace, and solidarity. Venezuela, we've seen 20 years of this great revolutionary process, and yet the U.S. is throwing everything they can, unprecedented theft of their wealth, of gathering other countries, other imperialist countries and allies, to try to do their best to undo this revolution, and it has stayed strong. That's the message that must be transmitted among all of us here gathered.
Why do you think that the Venezuelan revolution has kept us strong, even though those many pressures that the Bolivarian government has been submitted to in the past 3-4 years?
I think that the Venezuelan revolution has survived because of the way it was born. It was born not by a simple election. It was born by a struggle that Chavez undertook to break through the heavy, heavy blanket of the two parties that always existed, that shared their power and made people poorer and poorer while they became rich themselves. Chavez broke through that, and so he inspired a whole population that enabled him to be elected. A poor man with no party, no wealth. He was elected by the masses, and they have carried him ever since with his great idealism, his view of struggle, of unity, of peace, of sharing all the wealth that this country has, the great resources of Venezuela, for all the people, especially those who were the most oppressed. And so, just like the Cuban Revolution, just like the 40th celebration of the Nicaraguan Revolution that overthrew Somoza, I think Venezuela is at the forefront of the defense of all people's ideas. I'm from the United States, and the image of Hollywood is an image. But in the United States today, this summer, it's developing into a hot summer with continued police brutality, murders of Black and Latino youth, with this enormous crisis of the opioid epidemic, in which it's just been revealed by the media now, against the DEA's wishes, that 76 billion pills flooded the societies across the country, especially the south of the United States, causing 400,000 deaths, unneeded deaths because of addiction, because of profit. We're seeing now thousands of children in prison for being the children of immigrants, and their parents abused as well. It's amazing that Mike Pence, the vice president, who follows the politics, these racist and phobic politics of Trump, walked into a shelter in McAllen, Texas about 10 days ago, and he couldn't stay a minute because of the odor of these poor men, 400 men, jammed together for 40 days, no shower, not even access to water. They had to ask for a glass of water. They were being brutalized and tortured like their children. So that's capitalism.
That's capitalism, and the Sao Paulo Forum born as an alternative to that capitalism and to bind together all these progressive forces. Which has been the role of solidarity within the Sao Paulo Forum, and how you, from the movements that you are part of, you give a hand to countries like Venezuela, like Cuba, like Nicaragua, but also you denounce those violations in your own country. How is that happens? How that takes place?
There's always been a progressive movement in the United States, sometimes larger, sometimes smaller, but right now, in the last 2 years at least, but I think maybe the wave began with the Occupy in 2011, especially the last 2 years. There's a great interest in socialism, and many, many youth are incorporated into the struggle now. In my party, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, we've grown very quickly with very determined youth, so that we're in almost 90 cities now. It was an enormously quick growth, and other organizations are also growing. But for example, this year, since Guaido proclaimed himself, January 23rd, my organization, also a group I belong to, the Answer Coalition, Act Now to Stop War and End Racism, is a considerable anti-imperialist, anti-war group with Code Pink, with the Popular Resistance, with Veterans for Peace, and other organizations. We've banded together on the demands of no sanctions, no war, no coup in Venezuela. And it was what allowed me to come here for a month, February 12th to March 12th, during the blackout, the first blackout, during the bridge show of the U.S. when they tried to bring the so-called humanitarian aid, the Trojan horse, and I was there at one of the bridges, at Tienditas Bridge. Amazing resistance by the Venezuelan people. So I returned, and my organization organized 43 city events for me to travel for basically 3 months from quite a few states: New York City, Los Angeles, Seattle, San Francisco, Tampa, Florida, Ohio, 43 cities. And what showed it to us is that despite the 100% media war against Venezuela, I mean, it's been documented, the Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting organization proved that 100% of the editorials of the elite coverage, elite newspapers and the media, CNN, Fox, of their editorials and opinion pieces, not one was against the coup. from January 15 to April 15. So people have this instinctive view in the movement, those who are liberal, who say, I don't like this, it doesn't sound right, but how do I find the truth, given the media lies?
How do you find the truth about what's going on in these countries?
Well, how I find out is I'm part of a movement, and I came here. But how those people found out was they responded to the events I spoke at. Large audiences, I mean, unprecedented response, and a positive response, where people saw the video I showed, the Venezuelan voices and faces, and then came the embassy struggle in Washington, D.C. While I was on tour, the Answer Coalition, the Code Pink Embassy, the Popular Resistance formed the Embassy Protective Collective and did a remarkable 35-day struggle of defending the embassy, the sovereignty of the country, which was a huge violation. Never ever happened before, where the Vienna Convention on Diplomacy was so egregiously violated, and people became stronger as a result. They were denied food and water. They were arrested. They were hit by the cops. They were attacked by the right wing. They were the most racist, anti-gay, anti-woman things that they could hurl at the protectors. And so these kind of struggles is helping inspire more people. The movement is growing. We had a march on March 16 in Washington, D.C. of thousands. Everyone joined together to say, hands off Venezuela.
Indeed, hands off Venezuela.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to salute the Venezuelan people for your resistance and the continued victory that will end with what we hope is the end of the sanctions.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gloria. That was Gloria de la Riva, with whom we've been talking a little bit here of what is going on in this Sao Paulo forum, that one of the main issues discussed in the rooms of this forum is indeed Venezuela. Continue with us. And we are back now here in the Sao Paulo Forum, and we talk with Arnold August, who is a journalist, an author, and also a collaborator for Telesur English and Telesur Spanish, and a friend, of course, of Latin America. So now we'll be speaking with him about his experience, his work with Venezuela, his books, and also what he thinks about the left movement around the world. Welcome, Arnold.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much for having me.
Please tell us, what are your thoughts about the left movements taking place now in Latin America?
In Latin America, I think, despite all the hopes of the United States that obviously wanted to crush the left-wing movements, not only since January 23rd, 2019 by attacking Venezuela, but over the last few years, starting with Honduras in 2009, of course Lula and Cristina and other such examples. But the opposite has taken place. I'm normally a very optimistic person, but I have reason to be optimistic now. For example, just in Venezuela, despite all the attempts since January 23rd, 2019 by the United States and the Lima group to smash the Bolivarian Revolution and destroy Chavismo, the opposite has taken place. The Bolivarian Revolution, in my opinion, has become stronger. Chavismo has become stronger as a political trend, as an ideology. And here we are today, 5 months after January 23rd, 2019, when Chavismo was supposed to have been smashed. Here we are, where Chavismo is, once again, is the center, the epicenter of the Latin American left. A great victory for the left, Venezuela, but I think it also affects the left all over the world. Look what happened in Honduras. Only a short while ago, we had the 10th anniversary of the coup by Obama and Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden against the elected government at that time 10 years ago. But the popular movements by the Honduran people has increased on the occasion of the 10th anniversary. And there are many other examples of this in Latin America. And I think there's every reason to be optimistic. Just look at the number of groups and individuals, left-wing organizations, social movements that are participating here today in Caracas, in the very city that, according to the United States, was supposed to be occupied by pro-US forces. But it's far from being the case. It is being occupied now by the left. And so that's too bad for the United States. We are here to stay, and this movement of the left in Latin America is going to increase.
Arnold, how have you become so involved with the Latin American left, with Venezuela, with Cuba, with the ideals of men like Chavez and Fidel? How have you become so close to those countries, so those ideologies coming from Canada?
Well, coming from Canada, I've always had a very strong interest in, firstly, in Cuba, the political process in Cuba. I wrote 2 books on that, and then later on with regarding to Venezuela. And I've written a lot about Venezuela over the last few years, but I have to say my writing and speaking on Venezuela increased drastically after February 4th, 2019. Why? Because on that day, I was here in Caracas, and I had the great honor and opportunity to listen to Maduro speak about the Bolivarian Revolution. And immediately upon my return after February 4, 2019, I wrote even more articles in English, French, and Spanish with regards to the Bolivarian Revolution. And apparently, some people in the United States didn't like it very much. I am an intellectual, a journalist, but I'm also an activist. And so in the course of this writing, I also did very active publicity on my Facebook page for a very historic demonstration to be taking place last March 16, 2019 in Washington, D.C. But strangely enough, on March 15, the day before the demonstration, my Facebook page was taken down. Okay, I could take that. The next day, I went to the Montreal airport to take my flight to Washington, D.C.
I was going to ask you, what consequences have brought you to be close, to defend, to be solidarious with countries like Venezuela and Cuba? What have been the consequences you should suffer?
Well, the consequence, one of the consequences has been that on my way to the March 16th demonstration in Washington, D.C., I had with me a printout of the statements by several unions in Canada that represent more than 5 million workers. My intention was to read excerpts of these statements by the Canadian workers in support of the Bolivarian Revolution right in Washington, D.C., under the nose of the United States. But when I tried to get into the United States on March 16th, Homeland Security blocked me. Of course, they did not give any real reason, but we know it's for political reasons, and it's obviously my support for the Bolivarian Revolution and Nicolas Maduro. Now, how did I react? Obviously, it was an attempt to intimidate me. Was I intimidated? No. I started writing even more in favor of Maduro, more in favor of the Bolivarian Revolution. And even though the United States has attempted to stop my ideas from going into the United States, since March 16th, actually my ideas, my opinions, along with others, have found even more followers in the United States. How come? I'll tell you what. Because outlets, websites such as Telesur English, such as Counterpunch, such as COHA, the Council of Hemispheric Affairs, such as Venezuela Analysis, such as Global Research, and others, they have been very faithfully publishing my articles on Venezuela to reach the United States audience. So my ideas, they're not the only ideas of Venezuela, but I know my ideas at least are reaching the American public despite Homeland Security.
But now you're here invited as an intellectual to the Sao Paulo Forum.
Right.
And in the Sao Paulo Forum there are some topics that have been, after the final declaration in Havana and throughout this year, have taken much more impact on the left. Like, for example, the whole movement to make Lula free, to free Lula.
Yes, yes.
Lula libre. And also the denunciation of the sanctions and the blockade imposed to Venezuela, the attacks to Venezuela, also the blockade to Cuba, and the reactivation of the Act 3 of the Helms-Burton Act, and many other topics and especially and specifically to make conscience and to implement what heads of state and government signed in Havana in select meeting in 2014 to make Latin America and the Caribbean a zone of peace. Being here at this moment and specifically celebrating the 25 years of the Sao Paulo Forum in Venezuela, when the left movements and the progressive movements are being so much attacked, how, from your position as a Canadian intellectual, and solidarity friend of those countries, how do you raise your voice? How do you come closer to those people to explain them what is happening in Venezuela? Which is the reaction what motivates you to tell people, to make people conscious, aware of what actually really is happening here, and of course being part of that progressive movement?
Actually, I'm glad that you raised it, because a disinformation campaign in Canada by the mainstream Canadian media is as bad as the American disinformation campaign. So myself and other members of this delegation, we have a very strong delegation. We don't know how many yet, because as a result of the visa and ticket problems, we don't have the full delegation here yet. It's coming. But we have a very strong delegation. Every one of us, in our different way, we fight against the disinformation. We are struggling we have a demonstration, picket lines all over Canada. We have statements by unions. We have articles myself and other people write to try to set the record straight, to break through the mystery about what is Venezuela, the so-called humanitarian crisis. And there's no humanitarian crisis. Yes, there are problems, but there's definitely not a humanitarian crisis that justifies the U.S. and the Lima Group pretext for intervention in Venezuela. So it's a difficult job, but we have to keep on doing that. And I think in Canada, our delegation, the people on the left, we've become, it's a broader perspective, there are more people involved, and we are definitely even more determined now than we were before January 23rd, 2019. This may seem ironic, but the fact is that the disinformation is so strong, and we know the truth because we have access to Telesur, we have access to other media in the United States and Venezuela, that we know how the truth is so different from the disinformation that this makes us even more angry and even more determined to write about the truth about Venezuela, to demonstrate the organized activities in support of the Bolivarian Revolution. And in this context, I think this 25th edition of the Foro Sao Paulo is playing a very important role. We're taking off from a spot where the left has become stronger, I believe, but after this week here, I'm sure the left will become even stronger, and the United States will have another bone in its throat to try to overthrow the Bolivarian Revolution. And also, at the same time, we know they're trying to smash the Cuban Revolution by increasing the blockade against the Cuban Revolution. So my answer to that is unblock Cuba, unblock Venezuela, long live Fidel, long live Chavez, long live Maduro.
Thank you very much, Arnold.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. And like this, we make another short break here from Caracas.